I'm a psychiatric nurse, and early in my career, I worked at a residential mental health facility. One of our residents was an elective mute, which means that he didn't, wouldn't, and couldn't talk. But there were no medical reasons as to why. He had spoken early in his life, and in fact seemed quite normal back then, with the exception of him being close to 7 feet tall. He'd been raised in the Deep South and joined the military when he was 19, but one night he vanished. He went AWOL, and eventually he was declared missing and dead. 10 years later, a 7-foot-tall man walked into the VA hospital room in my part of the Midwest and said to the receptionist,
"My name is Marion, and I've been dead for 10 years.
Those words were the last words he ever spoke. He was covered with dust, and he was wearing the same clothes he'd been reported wearing the night he had vanished. His social security number had not been used, and he had no identification on his person. However, they were able to identify him, I guess via his fingerprints. The family was notified, but they said they had already grieved their lost man, and that whomever was claiming to be him simply could not be. They demanded not to be contacted again. Marion paced all day every day, moving his mouth that looked like he was talking or muttering, but no sound ever came out. He had an unnerving habit about throwing his head back with his mouth wide open, as if he were laughing hysterically. But not even a breath ever could be heard. If I talked to him, he appeared to listen, periodically throwing his head back in that laughter-mimicking way of his. Various medications were tried, but they did not affect him neither positively nor negatively. Occupational therapy did nothing because Marion would just grin, and unless told to stay put, he'd get up and start pacing again. On my last day at the job, the last thing I saw was Marion, pacing in the parking lot, throwing his head back to laugh. Later I wondered if all along I'd been dealing with a ghost. All these years later, I still have no idea. When I was 37, I went to my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car. The distance was about 35 miles through a very rural and almost abandoned part of the country. About 3 miles outside of the town, I see someone on the side of the road, flagging me down. It turned out that it was one of the guys I had attended school with. Jim gets in the car and we start talking. I had not seen him in 20 years, but he still looked the same, maybe a little older. We get to town and I ask him if he wants to come to the VFW and have a drink. He says,
"No, just take me home."
Jim's parents had only lived a few blocks from my grandmother's house, and I turned in that direction, but he said to take him to the outskirts of town. There was a mobile home park out there, and I figured that is where he lived. When we reached the end of the turnoff, he said,
"Just drop me off here. It was good to see you again."
And he walks off into the night. I go to the VFW, met some of my old classmates, we start to talk. As we are talking about who was coming to the reunion, I mentioned that I had just picked Jim up 3 miles east of town and had dropped him off. Everyone gets quiet. Even the guy singing karaoke stops and lays down the mic. My cousin goes white as a t-shirt.
"Barb, Jim died in that curve 8 years ago. Rolled his car. We were all at his funeral."
I started to feel really dizzy, and I went out to the car to take some deep breaths. There on the seat, the local newspaper, printed 8 years previous, containing Jim's obituary. I still have the paper. My dad used to work as a corrections officer at a rural prison. He drove the perimeter of the property for his entire shift, where he would check empty buildings for runaway inmates. It was generally a boring job. One night, My dad was parked on a hill reading a magazine when he started to feel a thumping in his body. He described it as the feeling you get when speakers are playing a song with really heavy bass. He put the magazine down and checked his rearview mirror where he saw someone outside the truck. He grabbed his pistol and jumped out of the truck with his weapon drawn. Outside the truck, he realized it was a projection of Native Americans walking through the truck and directly through his seat, only to disappear at the exact spot he was sitting. He said it was clear they were ghosts because many of them appeared injured. This went on for a few seconds, and then the whole apparition disappeared. He called the other perimeter guy on his walkie-talkie to try to explain, and the other guy almost immediately stopped communicating. Turns out the other guy had seen this happen before and didn't believe in ghosts, so he wouldn't talk about it.